Welcome. In this video, we are going to talk about mastering. And for that, I am going to cover two combinators from my combinator collection, which are the pre-mastering multi-tool and the mastering combinator. It will make this song from sounding like this to sounding like this. Alright, to know how did I do that, just stick around. Okay, so we have our song here, and it is now pretty well mixed. So let's do the mastering. First, I'm going to pull the pre-mastering multi-tool. Okay, before playing the song, let's talk about the combinator first. We have three distinct sections and a bypass button. The first section is called Width Boost. So as you can imagine, it will boost the volume of the side level. And I'm only talking about boosting the volume of the side, which is very different from what the imager from Reason will do when you increase the value of the width. Just for illustration, this is the stereo imager from Reason, and this stereo imager will make some trickery to widen the image, not boost the volume of the image. And it will sound very different. So in order to do that, the combinator separates the center image from the side image, which you can easily do by making a null of your song with the same version of your song but in mono. You invert the phase of this mono track and you get the side image only. So turning up this knob will boost the volume of the sides only. Just under we have a button called Restore Dynamics, and it is present because I noticed that when you boost too much the image, the sound is nice, but you lose some of the punch of the track. So Restore Dynamics will inject a mono signal that is being a little bit compressed into the center, so we recover the punch of the track without losing the benefits of having the side image boosted. And at last, we have a button called mauvaise, and this one will enable a stereo imager from Reason to boost even more the side image. Next, we have a Make It Nice knob, which is a cheesy name, I'll give you that. But basically, it's an EQ curve that looks like a smile. It also has an harmonic generator associated with it, and we can high pass the harmonics, so we can only target the high frequencies or every other value that you want. To finish, we have a clipper function associated with a compressor, and this function will cut the peaks before the mastering stage, so it gets a little bit easier for the limiter to work. Alright, let's now hear each function one at a time. Let's start with the width boost. Let me dial it down. Alright, so as you can hear, the side signal has been boosted, but we kind of lost the dynamics of the track, the impact. Let's disable the function. Listen to the bass. Let me enable the function. Right, bypassed. Enable. It is not very obvious, but we kind of lost the dynamics. Let me restore the dynamics while it's playing and you will hear the difference immediately. Let's enable the Restore Dynamics button. Disable. Enable. Alright, I think you get it. Let me now add the mauvaise button, as it adds a nice effect without smearing too much the side image. But be careful with that, don't push it too much, as it can mess up the stereo image more than it can increase the sensation of width. Let me disable it. Enable. Disable. Enable. Alright, let's bypass this function now and let's go to the make it nice function. Let's play the song. That's too much, obviously. Let me dial it down. Alright, let's listen only the EQ. Alright, let's listen only the harmonics. Alright, let's put a correct, somewhat pleasing value. And let's move the high pass filter.
Lève la tête le soir et regarde les étoiles.
Let's enable the EQ. I think the way it is set up by default is kind of good. You can just add a little bit of make it nice, and it really makes some sparkle on the top end and makes the low end a little bit more solid. While it's playing, let's bypass the function to hear the difference. Let's disable. Let's enable. Disable. Enable. Right, I think you get it. And third, the cut picks function, we are not going to hear much, but we can see what's happening if I insert something like a Pro L2, and we are going to use the visualization of it to understand what's going on. So I'm going to put the FAB filter into safe mode, so it just reduces the volume if it goes above the 0 decibel without altering the sound. All right, and let's see what's going on with the peaks. As you can see, it's already very hot as the peaks are going above the 0 dB mark, but let's cut the peak with the function to see what's going on. All right. Now, as you can see, the sound hasn't changed much, but clearly the limiter will have a much better time dealing with those peaks than the peaks we had before. If you are sending your track to a master engineer, I advise you to not cut the peaks before. The master engineer will probably have the tool to deal with that himself. Alright, so while I'm going to keep the FAB filter L2 for the visualization of it, we are going to enable the function we had disabled before, add a little bit of make it nice, then add the mastering combinator. Okay, so this combinator does mainly three things. The first thing is it adds some colors, it adds some compression in parallel, and finally it limits the sound while boosting the volume, so we have our final volume for our track. Now, the first section, which is the color. So the combinator is dividing the sound into 4 bands: subs, lows, mids, and highs. We have a solo button for each band. We have a volume button to modify the volume. Note that the default position for each volume is with the knob pointing up. First of all, we are going to talk about the subs dynamics function. It will reduce or increase the dynamics of the sub bass. So if you want to have more of a oomph of the kick, you can go to the plus side. If you want to have more of a flat bass line, you can go to the minus position. Then we have the dirt, which is a saturation made on the low band. Then saturation, which is a saturation made on the mid band. Then sparkle, which is also a saturation of the high band. In the second position, we have the New York compression style that we can add. It is also divided in 4 bands, and we can add some compression to each band to our taste. It will make the sound more interesting. And finally, we have the limiter stage. We have a main knob that controls the volume that is pushed through 4 limiters with different settings to achieve different purpose. By default, increasing the value of the limiter volume will drive the 4 limiters at the same time. But if you want for a different result, you can enable the multi-stage limit button, which will drive each limiter one at a time. So you can imagine the button is being divided in 4 slots. The first one is for increasing the volume of the first limiter. The second one is for increasing the volume in the second limiter, the third and the fourth. We have the clipping function, which I recommend you keep on. We have the look ahead function, which I also recommend you keep on, because without those functions, it is really likely that the track will saturate and go above the 0 dB. We also have here a master compress knob, which will drive a compressor for a gluing effect. And to finish, we have an output volume. I recommend you keep this knob to -1 dB, as -1 dB tracks is what Spotify, for example, is recommending before upload. Let's listen what we can do with the color stage first. Let's increase the sub dynamics. As you can hear, the kick is now more prominent. Let's try to reduce the dynamic. And now the kick is much more thin, but we can increase the volume of the sub band to compensate the loss of volume. And we are going to have a more thick bass low end. But I do prefer to have some more punch on the kick. All right, now let's add saturation. So that's dirt. Obviously, this is too much. Maybe like this. Saturation. Let's dial it in correctly now. Yeah, just a little bit. And now sparkles. All right. Maybe not too much, so we don't have ear fatigue. All right. Now, the New York compression. Let's add some subs first. So it's bringing the bass a little bit up front, and it also will increase a little bit the dynamics as well. Let's add a bit of lows. Maybe this is not necessary. Let's add some mids to have some presence. Alright, and now let's add some highs. It sometimes will be more desirable to have a high end boosted with the New York compression style function than the saturation. It really depends on the track. Let's now hear the difference before and after. Let's bypass the mastering combinator. Enable. Bypassed. Enable. Let's now talk about the final stage, the limiter. We are going to drive the limiter and see the effects on the graph in the fab filter. And to better understand and hear what we are doing, we are going to enable the one-to-one listen button. And what I recommend for a really fast setting is to have the button enable, the one-to-one listen button enable, then to drive the limiter, and when you hear the apparent volume, so the volume of the track, when you hear it goes down, it means you went too far. You can still keep it that way, but I recommend you to dial it back a few notches. Okay, let's do that. As you can see, the peaks are being chopped off already, but we don't hear so much difference on the sound for now. Let's push it even further. Now it starts to sound a bit compressed. And now, as you can hear, the overall volume went down, and you can also see that on the graph. So now the track is like ultra compressed, and I would want to hear that. Of course, if I disable this button, the track will also be super loud, but is it really something that you want? Let's dial it down and find a correct value. Let's bypass. Enable. Yeah, I think this is a nice setting. Our track is going to be plenty loud. Let's check that out with disabling the button one-to-one listen. Alright, let's bypass. Enable. Bypass. Enable. Alright, I'm going to re-enable the one-to-one listen button and dial in some master compression for some gluing effect. I don't know if this track will benefit from a glue effect, but let's try. I'm going to lower the attack first of the compressor to a really fast one, so it really catches the transient. Okay, I don't really like the tone of it, but I'm going to try to increase the attack so we recover some of the transient. Yeah. Overall, I much prefer without a master compression enabled, as this track is plenty dynamic and the dynamic is being kept by the limiter, and I really like the sound of it as is. Let's try to hear if by enabling the multi-stage limit we have a better result or not. Let's enable the multi-stage limit. Disable. Enable. Now, I prefer to have it disabled, really. Alright, so because it was taking a long time, I have made some tweaking behind the scene, and let's now compare both combinator on and off with the bypass button. I have disabled the fab filter so we don't have any latency when I'm switching between enabled and disabled. Let's hear first bypassed. Enable. Bypassed. Enable. Alright, let's see now what the fab filter has to tell us about how many LUFS we have. -14 LUFS is the recommended for streaming, mainly for Spotify. I think iTunes, for example, have another value, but -14 is a good target. Let's see what we have in this position. Okay, well, it's even a bit hot. which I don't really mind, and this value on the loudest part will probably be lowered when we play the whole track. Remember that the integrated number is calculated on the overall track, so if we want to have the real value for this song, I'll have to play the song from the beginning. Alright, here we are. We have a totally satisfying result with only the limiter from reason, and that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. I will leave you with the end of the song.
Tu regardes